Hey guys, it's Mike here, and it was just announced officially that Yu Yu Hakusho is going to be getting a live-action adaptation over on Netflix, which you can see in this post right here. And as it reads, when Yusuke dies saving another's life, he'll embark on a journey across the world of humans, spirits, and demons to return to the land of the living. Yoshihiro Togashi's legendary manga Yu Yu Hakusho will be a live-action series on Netflix. And of course, I've talked about Yu Yu Hakusho a number of times on this channel over the years in a number of different videos. It is by far one of my favorite series of all time, and maybe the best shonen anime and manga ever created, by the legendary mangaka himself, Yoshihiro Togashi, the same mangaka who created Hunter x Hunter as well as some other stuff over the years. But honestly, when it comes to this announcement, I'm not really particularly excited, because as we've seen a number of times over the years, many of these live-action anime adaptations don't exactly turn out too well. I mean, all we really have to do is look at Netflix's adaptation of Death Note, or perhaps Full Metal Alchemist, and then of course there was the legendary, horribly, terribly executed one of The Last Airbender, which, I mean, obviously people are going to split hairs if that's an anime or not, but it's still very much inspired by it. And finally, how can a Dragon Ball fan not mention Dragon Ball Evolution? Ugh. Disgusting. But that's the reason why I am not very excited about this, not to mention that it's also being created by Netflix. And I need to preface this by saying that Netflix definitely has had some great series over the years. I mean, all we have to do is look at the first series, maybe not the other ones, from the Marvel Netflix series such as Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, not Iron Fist, but, then of course there are other great series such as House of Cards, Dark, and a number of great shows that they've put on there. And, the fact of the matter is that even though they do have a number of these great shows, they also have a number of really bad shows they've done. And that's one of the things that definitely concerns me when it comes to adapting another legendary, all-time great anime and manga series like Yu Yu Hakusho. Because it's really easy to mess up such a high-concept story like Yu Yu Hakusho, especially when it comes to budget constraints. If they really go CGI heavy but they cheap out on that and we end up getting really terrible effects, or if the casting isn't perfect for characters like Yusuke, Kurama, Kuwabara, Hiei, and the like. I mean, can you imagine, they cast Toguro and it's like Jai Courtney or something? Ugh, please, no. And how they adapt the material is also very important, because I could definitely see Netflix really rushing a lot of things that happen, particularly early on. One of the big things that happens with Netflix is oftentimes these seasons end up being 8 episodes, 12 episodes, 13 at the most. And it's like, you're taking a show like Yu Yu Hakusho, for example, which has the first season is 26 episodes or something like that. And, subsequent seasons like The Dark Tournament are even longer. So are you really going to try and take an entire arc like that and compress it down to 12 episodes? Or are they going to do something, like maybe the initial Spirit Detective Yusuke getting his body back arc will be about 12 episodes? Because, one of the issues with the first arc, at least for many people who've discussed this in the past, is that a lot of people kind of get turned off by the initial 5 episodes or so. Particularly the aspect that they seem to be referring to here, which is that Yusuke dies saving someone's life, and then he has to do certain trials in order to get his life back before he can become a spirit detective. So if they're going to stretch that out for the entire first season, I can imagine it not doing very well. Especially if they go in there and they change certain characters and their motivations, or they compress them for time, because, the thing is, Yu Yu Hakusho, especially because it was written by Togashi, does such a great job of developing these characters, and by the end of the first season, you care more about the cast of characters than you do in practically any other anime that I've seen. And despite the first so many episodes being rather slow, they do a really great job of keeping the pace strong and making everything flow organically, while also inserting even more character development than the original manga did, which could be another issue is if they follow the original manga to a T and alienate a lot of the fans of anime who never never actually read it. Now, at the end of the day, the manga is the ultimate source of canon when it comes to these sorts of stories, whether it be Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball, Fullmetal Alchemist, and the story goes on. You know, the anime is always the more popular one in the West or in countries outside Japan, although in Japan the manga tends to be more popular because apparently they love to read comics even more than watch anime there. It's kind of flipped there, especially from America. But the thing is that the anime in many ways improved upon the manga that Togashi wrote, especially when it comes to the art. But there's a number of great things that the anime did in terms of character development and making different characters stand out apart from each other that I think that the story really needs to carry over into the Netflix adaptation. Just in terms of the characters' appearances, for example, with Yusuke wearing the green school uniform as opposed to the normal blue one, with Kurama having red hair instead of black hair, and with a number of positive changes that Studio Pierrot made in terms of actually creating the story. So if they stretch out the first so many episodes into an entire season, and then we end up getting something that's more along the lines of the manga-accurate version of the story, while cutting out a lot of the improvements that the anime made, I feel like that's going to be an issue. Another issue comes down to the action, because as we saw in a series like Iron Fist, sometimes Netflix isn't necessarily the best with that. Now, if they were to get people like, the people who did the action for the Daredevil series, then we can have some amazing fight scenes that take place in this, especially if they actually have good visual effects that they can use for attacks like the Spirit Gun, transformations like Hiei Shigan transformation, the Spirit Sword, and a number of awesome techniques that we see throughout Yu Yu Hakusho, as well as rendering really cool worlds like the Spirit World and the Demon Realm. But again, it takes a lot of effort, people who really care and love the source material as much as the fans do, and someone who really knows how to execute this stuff in order to make something like this actually work in live action. Now again, we've seen other comic books adapted in really good form, such as the MCU in the past, but that also had someone like Kevin Feige behind it, and Kevin Feige isn't exactly going to be doing a Yu Yu Hakusho adaptation. Another thing I wonder about is, are they going to cast all American actors, or is this going to be a Japanese-made, Japanese-language series? Because that can also have a big effect, because as we've seen with a number of Japanese-made series like Fullmetal Alchemist, for example, a lot of times the casting isn't very strong, and also you could say the same for the special effects, because I think that Attack on Titan also got an adaptation, and from what I remember from that trailer, the effects look terrible. So if they come out of the gate with terrible effects and poor casting, then unfortunately it's going to end up being a bomb. Another thing I'm really concerned about is something that Netflix tends to do in literally every single series that comes out with it now, to the fact that where it's become a trope and basically a drinking game, which is that they make everything go in the direction that Hollywood went in, which didn't really work out for them either, which is going, as you could say, woke. Which is that they infuse their very divisive and very clear politics into the narrative of the story, as well as the casting choices and some of the changes that they make in order to push certain kind of ideals. And considering just how much pushback that's gotten in recent years from big franchises like Terminator, comic book movies like Captain Marvel, and so on, I feel like that's definitely not going to go well for them, And you could literally look at every single Netflix series. I watched tons of them, especially this year, and every single one of them has forced romances of a certain kind, and, they change certain characters' appearances, I'm trying to say this in the most PC way possible, in order to try and appeal to a certain demographic. So, if pictures come out and, like, Kuwabara or Hiei looks completely different than he's supposed to, or, we see that certain characters are engaged in romances that they definitely weren't in the original story, or, we start to get marketing campaigns based around, look how progressive we are, look how incredibly woke we are, then I feel like that's really going to lead to it bombing incredibly quick. Another thing is that anime has actually been far more tactful and respectful of these kind of politics and these kinds of points of view and lifestyle styles than the West has in recent years, and Togashi is certainly someone who incorporates some of that into his stories. I mean, all we have to do is look at the Chapter Black arc with Inatsui and Sensui and see the kind of relationship that was going on there. So, you don't need to change anything from the original source material because they already have it there, and Togashi handled it much better than Netflix typically does. So what I'm really hoping is that Netflix won't try and force this stuff into the forefront and alienate audiences and kind of doom the future of this series, or, just kind of ruin it in a way that so many other adaptations have been ruined in the past. Because I'm sure that most people will agree we don't want these politics shoved into the forefront of these stories that it doesn't belong in, and we also don't want you to fundamentally change the characters that so many people over the course of generations have grown up with and loved since their childhood. So as a pretty much lifelong fan of Yu Yu Hakusho in this franchise, I definitely want to see this really well respected in terms of not only the characters, but the world building and the lore, and also, keeping these really divisive, intrusive politics out of it, as well as other agendas of today. Present the story the way it's meant to be presented, with a strong budget, with a great attention to detail, and of course, with a lot of respect for the source material. Don't be like other typical Hollywood executives and writers who think, I could easily write a better story than this and change everything the way I want it to be and make it better, because it always ends up being worse. So ultimately, what you need to do is present this with the absolute utmost care. You need to actually take this story and make it the way it's supposed to be made, the best way you possibly can, with the highest budget it actually needs, and in terms of great actors who can really display the emotion necessary and embody these characters in live action, like we've seen with actors at least like Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth, Chris Evans, in terms of other comic book adaptations, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what this is, from a manga into, a comic book adaptation. So really, Netflix, as a lifelong fan of Yu Yu Hakusho, I have to say that if you do this well, it's certainly something I'm going to sing your praises about. But if you mess this up, the fan base is coming for you. And they're probably going to cancel their subscriptions in droves, especially considering how much it costs these days. And if you really need any feedback about how to proceed with this story, go directly to the fan base and to Togashi himself if he'll be involved. Because don't go internally and look to your people who are creating these stories and think that they know better than the creator and the fan base, because they don't, and they never will. Go and be respectful of the material and present it the best way you possibly can. And if you do, you're going to open the floodgate for other great anime adaptations, like Dragon Ball, Getting away from Dragon Ball Evolution, we're going to actually possibly see good Dragon Ball adaptations if this works well. A good Full Metal Alchemist adaptation. A great Hunter x Hunter adaptation, perhaps. I mean, if you could make a great Togashi story once, you could definitely do it again with Hunter x Hunter. And the list goes on. So in conclusion, when it comes to talking about this news, I'm very, very cautious when it comes to the execution of this story. It could definitely end up being another bomb and a flop and a horrible atrocity towards another anime fan base. The next Dragon Ball Evolution, or The Last Airbender, if you will. But besides that, if it ends up being great, it could definitely, be something that Yu Yu Hakusho fans will come together and embrace, as well as a lot of new fans who see it for the first time on Netflix, who go back and read the manga and watch the series and fall in love with it just like all of us did. And with that, this great older story will become new again. And who knows, it might even lead to a boom in all anime adaptations, which leads to a great golden era for us anime fans. But I guess we'll find out in the future. Alright guys, so this has been the news of Yu Yu Hakusho getting a live-action Netflix adaptation. What do you think? Do you think it's going to turn out badly, or do you think maybe they'll actually pull it off? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date with all my future videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.